Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Brian E. Roach and Zach Metkler.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Brian Roach, the host with a bigger chest than Antonio Brown, or Mr. Big Chest, or Mr. Big Checks. He's definitely got me beat in the checks department, no question about that. And I'm sure it's going to come as no surprise to anybody that this will be another Antonio Brown episode. The good news is it will probably be our last. Woohoo! Okay. I say that knowing that there's other guys who tend to jump on the podcast, Joe specifically, and he'll want to have his 2 cents come in. So I'm sure we will actually touch on this again. But for the moment, it is always a pleasure to be joined by the professor of football, Zach Metkler. Zach is here to help us sort this out. Zach, how you doing, man?
It's just nice to be able to go to sleep tonight, knowing it's all good and done, and I can actually get a nice night's rest for once.
Now, you say that, and I want to preface all this before we get going in the fact that this is just an agreement. Nothing has actually been executed yet, and until the day that this trade is actually finalized, it ain't happened yet, but we all assume it will. For the moment, this is what it sounds like. This is what it seems like. Antonio Brown has been dealt to the Oakland Raiders, a team that over a month ago we suggested was the most likely landing point for Antonio Brown. And there are several things that come out of this. He's been traded to the Raiders for a third and a fifth, which is certainly less than anybody anticipated them getting. Although there was a lot of talk early on that the third-round pick was the best they were going to get out of Antonio Brown. Turns out that may have been somewhat prophetic for different reasons. But the flip side of this is the reason that this deal only happened with the Oakland Raiders is Antonio Brown really, 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 really wanted to be the highest-paid wide receiver in football. And Oakland was willing to negotiate a renewal of his contract or a restructuring of his contract or a new contract altogether that's going to pay him somewhere around $18.8+ million a year, putting him ahead of Odell Beckham Jr. as the number one highest paid receiver in the league until somebody else gets it, and then we'll see if Mr. Big Chest throws a hissy fit again. All that being said, Zach, give us your initial reactions to the trade.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, myself included, were hoping for more draft capital. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't want a second round. I really think a first rounder was out of the question, even though, there were rumors that the false deal with Buffalo was going to end up being the Steelers swapping first rounders and moving up to 9, but we have no way of knowing that for sure. I was hoping for a second rounder, but quite frankly, getting a third rounder and a fifth, but the third rounder in particular, the 66th overall pick, that might as well be a second rounder. When you get into those early and late rounds of picks and whatnot, that you can make the excuse and the argument that you're probably going to get a guy that has a second round grade because of how early it is in the third. And with all the antics that have been going on with Antonio Brown on and off the field, over the last 2 months, dating back to week 17, Steelers fans should really not be that surprised that's all they get. And I know there's the mindset of, oh, well, he should come back and work things out. If you've been in a locker room at any point in your lives, at any level, at any sport, you should know how much this type of toxicity can lead to relationships being unable to be repaired. I know Aditi Kinkhabwala has talked to Kevin Colbert about it, and he's been on record saying that no relationship can't be fixed. But at some point, you need to step back and realize at what point is it worth fixing. I understand AB is an all-world talent, but this was a situation where you needed to get him off his hands or off your hands. And I think realistically, it might not seem good, but having 10 draft picks gives the Steelers a lot of ammunition to move up and down the board. Having 4 picks in the top 100 definitely gives them a lot of breathing room if they see a guy they want to move up and snag that feel can help them out. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it was a bad trade for them, because I think they got a guy off their hands that was going to cause a boatload of distractions this year. And even if he doesn't play, that's still going to be a lingering narrative and a lingering distraction you have to deal with all year if you don't trade him. So it's not as easy as oh, we'll just bench him and let's have him pay the money back. So I think the Steelers finding a way to get him off their hands was really something they needed to do. And getting a third and fifth rounder, quite frankly, is a good value based on everything that's gone since his value was through the tank. I think it was Tommy actually mentioned when you think about the fact that both him and Martavis Bryant went for a third-round pick, kind of shows you where the league was valuing Antonio Brown at this point.
Yeah, it might have been as long ago as a week, although at this point it feels like a year ago, when the Mr. Big Chest stuff came out, when the AB can't take no more unguaranteeds, whatever that is. I said, he's taken what is a first-round plus level talent, which there's no disputing that Antonio Brown, as a talent only, is well worth a first-round draft pick, if not multiple first-round draft picks, or at least multiple picks that are higher than what they got. The problem is, after everything that's come out, after everything he's done, a lot of franchises are going to look at that and say, no, thank you, not interested. And I will play out what my belief is with the Buffalo scenario in a second. But it is not at that point in time. Anyway, I tweeted out that if Kevin Colbert can get anything above a 6th-round pick for this guy at this point, I will consider it a steal. Do I honestly feel they got value? Of course not, because they didn't get value. Not in terms of Antonio Brown, the player. In terms of Mr. Big Chest and Mr. Big Checks, they did fine. And here's the thing about it. When you're dealing with a market that only has one buyer in it, you are limited to what you can do. When that one buyer says, here's what we'll give you, you can either choose to take it or not take it. And in a second, we're going to go down the road of why they couldn't have made the choice to not take it, or what would have happened if they had. But let me just say this. The one thing I will say is Antonio Brown showed that a player can have influence over what they do and how they go. Do I appreciate what he did from the standpoint of a fan or a fan of the Steelers? Certainly not. He crapped all over the Steelers, and he made it very clear through the various narratives of, I just want to go someplace where I can win. Winning is all that matters. No, Ben was mean to me. He said mean things. It made me cry. I had to go home and sob in the corner, and now I don't like him no more. He's not my friend. To, I can't play for no more unguaranteeds. And the bottom line is, the truth is, this was always about one thing and one thing only: money. And there was no way the Steelers were going to renegotiate a contract they had just essentially signed and had 3 years left on it. And Antonio Brown wanted bigger money. And we'll get into that in a second as well. But my opinion on what happened with Buffalo is, this is how you can have some power. It's not that Buffalo could have said, well, if we're going to trade for you, and if you don't want to come, fine, then we will litigate with you. But a smart GM says, I don't need that crap in my season. Nope. I don't need that poison in my locker room. So if that's what's going to happen, they backed away. It's not that the Steelers blew that trade. Antonio Brown did definitely blow up that trade. And it's a trade that would have been blown up in almost all cases for no better reason than nobody wants to deal with that. So, I don't know if you see that any differently than I do.
No, if I were, and I've said this for time and time again, I've always been the mindset of, if I'm a GM, I like talent, and I also like respect to the organization and the guys who put the team first. And at no point in time, if I have the opportunity to go and trade for a player of Antonio Brown's caliber, and he's like if Larry Fitzgerald in his prime came out and was on the trade block, I'd be giving up hand over fist trade picks to get him, because he's going to be a great representation of your organization. At what point is the talent, and there's the same thing that came out with Mike Tomlin making these comments, at what point does the talent not outweigh the extracurriculars, so to speak? And if I'm a GM like, Mr. Bean of the Bills, I'm not going to go and take the opportunity to give up all this trade capital for a guy that's going to create all this headache regardless of the talent that he is on the field. Because, again, at some point in time, the chemistry is going to be sabotaged when you look at the toxicity that's being brought upon by one or two players in an entire organization. And Antonio Brown, being the superstar that he has the power to really derail any type of things you have working on in the locker room with the teamwork, the camaraderie, the chemistry. So if I'm a GM, I'm not touching him, at least not for the value of which the Bills were obviously considering at one point to give up for him, especially then you have to go dish out the new money. You have to go and bring him in and hope he's not going to be the same distraction. Hope that you have the personnel on your staff that can, keep him under wraps and make sure his personalities come flaring out of nowhere. So to me, it's not worth the pick. And that's why I don't blame the Bills, and I also don't blame the Steelers. The people that have the narrative that the Steelers in any way, shape, or form ruined that trade with the Bills weren't paying attention to the finite details that were going on. The fact that the Bills, were going to try to negotiate a deal with AB and with Drew Rosenhaus, and that got blown up instantly. And then, the Bills did the right thing as far as I'm concerned and backed up. From their perspective, they backed up. I would, and if I'm a Bills fan, I wouldn't be mad at that, because if he doesn't want to go there and play, why are you going to put up with that headache no matter how much money you throw at him? So I don't blame them at all.
Clearly, if you're a Bills fan or a Mumford & Sons fan, that's how you feel. Just referencing the little video that may have gone around. If you haven't seen it, just search for Antonio Brown and Mumford & Sons, and you'll enjoy yourself. I know that I did.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's look at the actual options that they had. Now, this, Jerry Dulac is reporting that 3 teams were still interested in Antonio Brown. Now, that makes it sound like there's not a one-person market. But, again, 3 teams can be interested, but how interested? And if, you have to look at this in 2 lights. If the deal is simply take Antonio Brown on board for the contract he currently has in place and move forward, you're talking about a different thing. As opposed to if you're going to trade for me, you got to pay me more money, or I'm never going to show up. I'll quit. I'll retire unless you're going to give me and play by my rules. Okay, that's different. That decreases what any team is willing to invest to get him, because I'm likening this. This is a deal that is essentially a free agent deal. All right. It's a free agent deal where part of the free agent spending was giving up draft picks, which of course never happens. But that's what Antonio Brown got. He got a free agent deal without being a free agent. And it just is what it is. I mean, you give him props for sticking to his guns, and we're never going to know if he would have held out, although we can assume he probably would have. But we aren't going to know for sure if he would have held out and would have caused more issue as training camp arose. And what we do know for sure is it would have been a storyline all year long. And we've already gone through that once. So Now we don't have that. But I think that's what this is. It's a free agent contract that Antonio Brown went out and got. And when you're signing a free agent, you don't anticipate giving up draft capital. But that's the only way you're allowed to sign this particular free agent. So what teams were willing to give up on top of this renegotiated contract was always going to be lower than what the value of Antonio Brown was. As soon as those kind of demands came out, we should have all anticipated this being a much lower haul than we were hoping for.
Yeah, and I honestly thought that when that started coming out, that they might even be looking at the possibility that a 4th might be all they can get. I know you mentioned 6, but even though we know the talent, I think that's what gets lost with this entire discussion with a lot of fans, is the fact that you're looking at a guy that he's no longer being gauged for his on-field talent, because even at 31 years old, Antonio Brown is still amongst the NFL's elite 2 or 3 receivers, if not the number 1. So there's no questioning that, but you have to look at the entire picture, and that's the fact that whenever you see the price tag that was originally being given out with AB, where he says it's not about the money, it's about me just wanting the respect I deserve and to go to another team and get away from the Pittsburgh Steelers, you have a guy that's a top 3 receiver, top 2 receiver that'll be making in the ballpark of the mid-teens range with no guaranteed money that you have to be attributed to him. What team in their right mind wouldn't be willing to give up the house for that type of player? Anyone would. Like you said, the minute you start getting into those complexities with this re-signed deal and getting more money, and especially when you see the deal that the Raiders are, tentatively going to sign him to, it's absolutely unreal. And there's not many teams that want to sign him to that and have the headaches and give up the draft capital. So it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that there was such a small market and that the fact that the 3 and a 5 is all they got for him.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, you know, I'm going to look at this and say it is an okay haul. I mean, the point you made earlier on, which I think is a very valid point, is even though this is a third-round pick, it's as close to a second-round pick as you can get in the third round, really, because it's very high up in the third round. That has value. It can give the Steelers leverage to move around if need be. The thing about this is with the Marcus Gilbert trade netting them a 6th-round pick, this one giving them 2 picks, they've now got some flexibility in this draft where if they need to move a spot or two in the 2nd round, or if they need to try and move up in the 1st round, they may be able to do that. Whereas, you know, they had limited draft capital. They didn't have a lot of extra picks. They weren't going to be able to make a big splash if they wanted to. So that is one of the upsides that come with this, is that even though these aren't the picks we wanted, that 3rd-round pick definitely has value, and it gives them some flexibility.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've seen the Steelers in the past move up and down whenever they see a guy falling or they just see a team that's going to be a risk of taking the player that they want. And 10 picks, especially when you have those 3 6th-rounders, that's the key right there, because those are really valuable picks, but they're picks that allow you to have the flexibility to move up and down the board within reason, really, when you get outside the 1st round. So I think that at least gives them ammunition. Obviously, like the 35th pick that the Raiders were rumored to be giving the Steelers in the 2nd round would have been nice, purely from the ability to have a guy land you, because you really get two top 40 players, even 2 top 30 players at a premium. But realistically, you know, we've seen Colbert go and make these types of moves where, you know, he hasn't been afraid to either trade back and acquire more picks, or because they have so many picks, move up and get a guy they really like and think is going to help. So even though the haul, like you said, is not what they want, it's what they kind of still needed. Getting 2 picks and giving you a total of 10, you know, is a nice range. And now they have an extra 5th-round pick that they didn't have before. They have those 3 in the 6th. They have a lot of late-round picks they could package up and move up and get a guy. And I like their opportunity to do that, especially in a class like this where they don't really have a boatload of needs. They do have needs and they need to have holes to be filled, but there's nothing really that jumps out as saying, oh, you know, they have, like the Raiders in their scenario, they have a lot of holes to fill, and thus they need to keep as much draft capital as they can get. The Steelers aren't in a position like that. They need a couple positions here and there, which we've discussed in podcasts past. And, you know, free agency might go a long way. If they do nail a free agency, that's even less, where they can have a lot more flexibility to jump up, snag a guy they like, maybe even in the 1st round and push game and stuff. So time will tell.
Yeah. Now, The next question really is where do the Steelers go from here, and what are the pluses of this? The biggest one for me is this concept of addition by subtraction. Do they get better simply by losing these personalities? And we can include Le'Veon Bell in that conversation. But you know, there's two ways to look at this. Clearly, any sane person understands the talent level on the team goes down. They do not have the same caliber of players that they would have had. But this is a team sport. It is not a me sport. You know, and the team's ultimate goal is to win championships. Obviously, Antonio Brown's ultimate goal is not to win championships, it's to win money. So, you know, it's a different perspective and a different goal and a different mindset. So if your ultimate goal is, I just want to get paid, I want my stats, and I don't care if we win a championship, it would be nice, but it's not my ultimate fantasy. And the team's ultimate goal is to win. When you subtract that kind of personality from a locker room, and I know that there's been tons of players who come out and said he was a great teammate, we loved playing with him, and I get it. He was a hard worker. He was fantastic. I think Antonio Brown in the locker room probably was fine for a lot of people. But I also think that there's a mature group of players, and that doesn't necessarily mean old, it just means mature, who look at the baggage that comes with him and say, I'm not mad that it's not here, even if they won't publicly come out and say that.
Yeah, I also have a theory that I think we're going to learn more as time goes along. That because I think it was Ben Albright that put it out there, but I have picked this kind of underlying tone that there's more than just the Ben Roethlisberger aspect. I think there was a lot more dissension in the locker room towards AB's personality than what meets the eye. I think that a lot of it got put on Ben. I think there's a lot more, and I also would be surprised you later on find out based on his tweet, based on the unfollowing of a person, if you look into that type of stuff. I don't think Juju and him have the greatest relationship either. I also don't think AB ever served as like a mentor to Juju, which, makes him even more self-made. But besides that, I'm a firm believer, and I always have been, that when you look at a team, especially in football, where there's so many moving parts, you have 53 guys on a roster, you have the huge, enormous coaching staff, you have 8 to 10 guys on your practice squad. There's so many moving pieces. If you're not all working towards the same goal, or even if you're not, but you have a guy that's like Antonio Brown, who is the superstar, everyone knows him, he has his own brand, he is the guy. If someone as strong as him is not working towards the same goal that the rest of the team is, and is not putting an emphasis on winning, which we've seen before where AB puts up the great stat line, the Steelers lose a heartbreaker, and he seems not affected by it at all. They win a dominant game against a rival. He doesn't have a game that he likes, so he's going to complain about it. We've seen that, which that's a sign right there. It's not all about the winning to him. It's about the personal stat lines and the money, as far as I'm concerned. So getting a guy like him out of the locker room, getting a distraction that was like a guy like Le'Veon Bell out of the locker room, getting a guy like Martavis Bryant, even going back a little bit more, getting him out of the locker room. Those are personalities that are creating this toxic environment that are potentially taking away from what the greater team goal should be, and that should be Lombardi trophies and Super Bowl appearances and a greater success and team chemistry that they haven't seen. I look at a team like the Eagles 2 years ago that, upset the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They had no business being there. But what was the one theme you heard about that team? It was us and everybody else. We're going to fight for each other. We're going to go up in every single game. We know we're the underdogs. And because we have this brotherhood and this camaraderie, we're going to go out there and dominate. And when your MVP caliber quarterback goes down, you shouldn't still win the Super Bowl, no matter how good or bad you think Nick Foles is. And I think that is the ideal description of what it means to be a team that doesn't have talent oozing out everywhere, albeit they were still a talented roster. They don't have talent oozing out everywhere and still found a way to win. The Steelers have won games with a hell of a lot less than what they are going to have next year in 2019. And I think, people that sit there and say, well, they're a less talented team, yes. Anytime you take away arguably the best running back and the best receiver in the NFL off of the same roster, you're going to get a decrease in talent. That doesn't mean that you're going to be a worse team. So there's multiple ways to look at it. I believe addition by subtraction is what this is. And if we go all next season without any of the drama, and they start winning games and they start getting hot and they start becoming a dominant team like we've seen them be, I think that'll be the first instance that you really see what this team is capable of doing without the distractions, without the drama. They can go out there and just play football as one group of guys going together to win games as one.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's another narrative that's coming out lately that I just want to put a nail in it and say, first of all, it's shoddy reporting, it's cheap reporting, it's easy reporting, and it's baloney. I was going to use foul language, but, we're a family show. Anyway, this narrative that somehow Antonio Brown has been underpaid by the Steelers. And this is being pushed out there by ESPN reporters and other folks. So it's not, this isn't just fans or Antonio Brown fans trying to push a narrative. This is media, some of the big names in media trying to push this narrative that somehow Antonio Brown, who until the Odell Beckham deal was the highest paid receiver in the NFL, was being underpaid. Hindsight is not 20/20, and we do not live in a world where we are now has to translate into where things were 3 years ago. The Steelers have done very well by Antonio Brown. They made a big investment after just 2 years when he was just coming into his own. They have advanced him full levels of salary, millions and millions of dollars, more than once in the back half of his deal. And they did very well with him in extension. He was happy with the extension. There is absolutely no, and I just want to nip that in the bud. You can tell me if you don't agree, but I know that you do. There is no logical or realistic foothold that the narrative of Antonio Brown suffered as an underpaid wide receiver, that's baloney. It's bullcrap. And it's going to come out, but it's nonsense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the same. It's not like you're looking at a guy like Le'Veon Bell who was working off of a rookie contract before the franchise tags, and you can make the argument that he was underpaid. Or Todd Gurley was underpaid when he was on his rookie contract. When you, at any point, when you set the new standard of how we pay elite receivers like Antonio Brown did in 2017, the argument should be lost that you are being underpaid. And I don't know if they're looking specifically at the numbers that were going to be transferable upon trade, where they see the big zero guaranteed dollars without realizing the fact that he had guaranteed money left in Pittsburgh. But when you get traded, the Steelers take that up so the new team owes zero. I don't know if these big talking heads have missed that point where, they see that zero and think, oh, the Steelers had no guaranteed money with them, but yet the Steelers are still eating $21 million in dead cap by trading him. So clearly there's money left on the table. It's just lazy reporting, and these reporters are trying to, not to slander them, but they're trying to set their narrative and have it be where the team is the bad guy. Because a lot of times, and I understand the whole players association versus the league as a whole, and how players are fighting for their rights as players, and the team still trying to hold from the business aspect. I get that, but when you have a player like Antonio Brown that got paid much more than he should have at one point in his career, and then reset the market for an NFL all-time high for receivers, and then did it again, that's not being underpaid. That's just laziness and trying to fit a narrative. That's all it is. Yeah,
it's crap. All right. That brings us to this idea of winners and losers. And look, in some senses, everybody won and everybody lost. I hate this narrative that somebody won this deal and somebody lost this deal. And the truth is, we're not going to know the answer to that until well down the line. I want to bring up a point. Antonio Brown was like the most targeted guy in the league last year, right? Ben threw at him some absurd amount of times, like 168. I don't even remember. I'd have to look it up again. It was an enormous amount of targets. Guess what? That translates to like 12 targets a game, or 11.4 or something like that. The Raiders' highest targeted wideout was Jordy Nelson at 8.8.
Yeah.
8.8. So you're talking about three less targets a game, under 10 a game. What happens when Antonio Brown isn't getting targeted as much as he wants? What happens when he ends up next season with less than 1,000 yards in total yardage and doesn't have as many touchdowns and may not have as many catches? And all of a sudden, does the deal still look as good? And is Antonio Brown going on Instagram with his Raiders hat being a happy camper? Or is the narrative, well, you know what, the instant love at first sight with Derek Carr isn't so much anymore? Or what happens when Derek Carr gets hurt and now he's getting passes from somebody else? You cannot project what's going to happen. What we can look at and say is the Raiders got a player whose value is better than the picks they gave up. So from that standpoint, okay, it's better. They made out okay, maybe. The Steelers definitely dealt a player who was not beneficial to their team and was never going to play for them again. That's we skipped the part about what could the Steelers have done differently had they not traded him, and we'll talk about that, I guess, in a second. But that's the bottom line: is the Steelers are ahead of the game because they don't have this drama brewing anymore, and they don't appear to have anything that is going to jump up and become drama for next season. And maybe that means they can focus on football. And, we won't go through an entire preseason camp where every day the questions are what happens when blah, blah, blah doesn't show up, or why, what do you think about this? And the linemen won't be all upset and Ben won't be all, and people can just focus on their jobs. So that is a benefit without a doubt. And look, you talked about $21 million in cap space, but that's it. That's the end of it. They don't have any more. It frees up a ton of cap space down the road for the Steelers, which is great. You start talking about next year, then we don't talk about this anymore because, that opens up a huge amount of financial capital that they can use to re-sign their own players, to go out and try and do something. So I think there's a benefit to both sides. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the long-term projection, like you mentioned, in 2020 right now, especially after moving Marcus Gilbert, moving AB, where he'll be 100,000% off the books after this season. Le'Veon Bell's not counting against you. You have to figure out what you're doing with Ryan Shazier. There's a lot of guys that are impending free agents, but realistically, the Steelers are going to have a nice chunk of salary cap moving into 2020, which, quite frankly, Juju's going to need to get a contract extension. You're going to have to consider what you're going to do with James Conner. There's guys that are going to need money. But not having AB on the books anymore gives you the opportunity to get these guys contracts if you feel that they're going to be legitimate parts of your future. But I agree that you can't look at the winners and losers right now because, one, the Steelers, all they got in return was theoretical players at this point. We don't know who they're going to flip these picks into. As a reminder, Juju was the 60th pick in the 2017 draft. The Steelers are picking 66, and this is an extraordinarily deep wide receiver class. Who is to say that James Washington doesn't develop? There's all these Golden Tate rumors going around right now that he's interested in coming to Pittsburgh after he tweeted that cryptic thing at them after the trade this morning. And who's to say the Steelers don't snag a stud receiver with the 66th pick? Obviously, you can't replace Antonio Brown, so I'm not suggesting you can replace his talent because you simply cannot replace that. But who's to say they're going to be worse off when they get a young receiver in there next to James Washington, Ryan Switzer, Juju Smith-Schuster, and another guy? And Vance McDonald's still in the mix. James Conner came on a little bit as a receiver. You have Jalen Samuels. You're probably going to either have Xavier Grimmel, another tight end. But do I need to keep listing the fact that you lost the best receiver, but you still have talent? You look at the Steelers' offense as a whole. Yeah, it's going to look a lot different without AB there. But who's to say they can't flip these picks into something great that can help the team win? That these guys are going to come on with the same mindset that a lot of players like T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, Dave DeCastro, Ben Roethlisberger, all these guys have, where they want to win. What happens if you get one of those guys? And you're talking about a team that has a core group of young receivers that can do something great with Ben, an offense that has their entire offensive line from last year pretty much intact, assuming that Filer, a core four, step up into that right tackle spot like they did last year. There's a lot of things to be excited for. So to sit there and say one way or the other that a team won or lost at this juncture is not accurate, because who's to say AB lives up to that contract? The only way AB lives up to that contract is if he goes and has 100-plus receptions for about 1,300 to 1,400 yards and 10-plus touchdowns. That's going to be the only way that he lives up to that contract, because if he doesn't get those numbers, you're paying a guy almost $20 million in new money. It's still going to be about $17 million a year, but $20 million a year in new money, the highest paid receiver in the NFL, to not put up those numbers, that's a waste. So we're just assuming that he's going to put those numbers up, and we're just assuming that the Steelers got fleeced before we see what they actually do in free agency and what they end up doing with these picks. So you can't say one way or the other that they won. As far as we know, they both won. Steelers get a toxic player off their hands. The Raiders get a receiver they think could be the number one guy with them, no problem, and put up the elite production he's done in years over the last 6 years. So as far as we know right now, in March of 2019, both teams won, and both teams have equal capacity to lose if the Steelers bomb those picks and AB does not produce at the level they signed him to. So it's a waste of these people sitting there saying, oh, the Steelers got fleeced, they're never going to be the same team. I had a person suggest that they're never going to win, they're not going to win anymore because they lost AB, et cetera, et cetera. So, the team is still talented without AB. They got less talented when they took his on-field talent away, but this is still a very talented team that hopefully has one less distraction and can add a couple more pieces via free agency in the draft and pick right back off where they've left off for the last couple of years offensively.
All right. The last thing I want to touch on is what could they have done differently? And the honest truth is the only real option the Steelers had, the only leverage the Steelers had, was to not trade him. And when you don't trade Antonio Brown, what you do is replay drama that, and maybe at a elevated level, because now it's not a player who isn't under contract that doesn't show up. It's a player who is under contract that doesn't show up. And that's a different animal. There was enough negativity with just a franchise franchise tag on Le'Veon Bell, with Ramon Foster tweeting about the money, and there's some animosity with a guy who doesn't want to play for X money. But when it's money you've already agreed to play for, that's now you're talking about a guy who really is bailing, and why would we be surprised he's bailing on his team? He already did it once, so there's no reason to think he wouldn't continue to do it. I just don't see that the Steelers had any secondary options, even though I tweeted this myself. I was at the point where you could call it bitter, you could call it vindictive, but I was ready to say, just let him not show up and fine him and let him be miserable and ignore him and let him, go through the season, retire, and then you can try and get your $11 million in signing bonus back. I was at that point, but that's a fan's perspective. Right? That's not a legitimate business perspective, because what you're doing when you do that is you're sabotaging your own team. You're sabotaging your business. And no smart person is going to do that. A fan can be mad and say, well, screw him. I want him to suffer. And I get it, because you get that anxiety and that angst and that anger towards him. But that's not a realistic position for the Steelers to have taken. So what could they do beyond what they did? I think that they did what they could do. They're really, even though we like to think the team has all the the control in this situation, they did. They had the control that they could use, but the I guess the impact of leveraging that control against him wasn't worth it. And so they got what they could get.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's nothing else the Steelers really could have done, because cutting him, regardless of what fans say, cutting him was never an option, because then you give him free reign to go and sign with a team like New England or Baltimore. Like, you don't want that to happen. You want to, if you're going to do something, you want to trade him. And I understand the whole, make him pay back the $11 million when he breaches that contract, and get him to come back and do these things and really screw him over and really put him in his place. But do we really want to continue this headache for another season? Because that's all it would turn into, is just another headache where every single week after a Steelers game or during weekly practices, when they're doing Tomlin's doing his press conferences or Ben's being interviewed, instead of asking them questions about the upcoming opponent or the previous game, it's going to be, what about AB? AB this, AB that. We're not going to continue doing this. We saw what it did last season with Lev Bell and how the franchise tag became a nonstop narrative. You're just creating more and more distractions for yourself. When you trade him now, and the Steelers don't have to play Oakland for the presumptive future, unless they come out and start dominating all of a sudden. He's now off your hands. You don't have to worry about him. There's going to be questions, I'm sure, but as the season gets underway, it's going to be a mute point. So get him off your hands. And really, the Steelers did that for about the market value of what the NFL was looking at him as, a 3rd and a 5th round pick. We can sit here and fans can argue all day until they're blue in the face that he's a 1st round pick, because he is one of the 1st round pick. But, you have to do what you have to do, and I think the Steelers did what they felt was the best way to do to keep Antonio Brown happy and get him away from the team, to still get something back in compensation for it, and to just move forward in 2019 with a clear head and be able to move forward in making the team better and putting together a championship caliber roster for 2019.
Yeah, there's a saying when I used to buy and sell Steelers football cards, I used to say, people would say, how much is this worth? And I'd say, it's worth what somebody's going to pay you for it. Yep. And that's no different than with Antonio Brown. How much is Antonio Brown worth in a trade? Whatever you can get for him. And that's you can put a preconceived notion of value on something. That doesn't make it so. There's a difference between what you think is reality and what reality is. And in this instance, the reality is Antonio Brown's value in the NFL was a 3rd and a 5th.
Yep. That's just the way it is.
So as much as I am confident that we won't be having trade conversations about Antonio Brown anymore, I'm sure that there will be a drag-on saga that relates to Antonio Brown, and the media will try and pull the narrative whenever there's a game and the Steelers underperform. Well, what would have happened if you had AB here? Will be a question that gets asked. I feel relieved that our long national nightmare, meaning Steelers Nation, is over.
I hope.
I hope. So I think we're going to leave you guys with that. Thank you for listening in. Remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. Get the bell on so you'll get notified when new content comes up. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at @CannonsDon'tThun. I ask you, please go ahead and do so, because I don't have enough trolls. And on the other hand, Zach, tell them how they can follow you.
Careful what you wish for. But you can follow me at GZSports_ZM. I love discussing things with people.
Absolutely. So until next time, everybody, as we always like to say, it's chaos out there, so be kind.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.